Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
I'm Luke Edwards, Associate Director of Church Development. In today's episode, we catch up with David Hockett, District Superintendent of the Metro District, and Stephanie Moore-Hand, District Vitality Associate of the Metro District, to talk about some exciting things that are happening in their area. We talk about churches that are hosting community vaccinations, how churches are remissioning their properties, and the multicultural, multiethnic cohort happening in their district. Friends, here's David and Stephanie.
Stephanie, David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Luke, for having us today.
Thanks, Luke. It's good to be with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're excited to talk with you all this week about the Metro District. So on the Means of Grace podcast, we've been highlighting each district, hoping over the next few months to be able to just spend a little time with each district so the rest of the conference can just hear about some cool things that are happening in your district. David, we know that you are transitioning into a new position at Davidson, so congratulations for that. And we're glad that we were able to catch you before that transition. I know it's a busy time, so we're grateful for your time and grateful to Stephanie too to share about everything that's been happening in the Metro District. So where should we start? What's something cool that's been happening in the Metro District lately?
Stephanie, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks again, Luke, for having us. And so I guess we have a lot of cool things, but one of the things, because we're in this season of pandemic, just want to lift up the vaccination clinics that we have the privilege of doing in the Metro District. Presently, we probably have about 15 churches that have said yes to hosting vaccination clinics. And in the beginning, when the state of North Carolina contacted me and our district office, they needed to target and make sure that we were engaged in our African American, Latino, Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islanders, and Native Americans. They were disproportionately underserved when it came to vaccinations. And our churches have stepped up. We have, like I said, about 15 churches who have been boots on the ground, host sites. And at this point, as of today, our last one for this week is Matthews United Methodist. And we've served and have a hand in vaccinating over 3,000 people over the last 3 weeks. Yeah. And so it's been a lot of work, and people have just stepped up to the plate and said, yes, we don't know what we're doing. We've never done anything like this before, but here are we. And the feedback, Luke, from the surrounding areas have been tremendous. The stories and narratives and pictures that we have taken that says that we're so grateful for the church, because the church is in community. The church is networking with underserved communities. And we have truly, these churches, these courageous leaders have impacted their communities. And we don't even know the depth of it at this point, but we already have stories.
So what entails being a host site? So what is the church or those 15 churches, what have they had to do, or what's that looked like?
So basically, the federal government sends to each state a parcel of vaccines. And so the state then has a pool of certified vaccination organizations that are not necessarily always the hospitals and the pharmacies, the big name box pharmacies, Walgreens and Rite Aid. And so they have one-offs, if you will, pharmaceutical companies that are smaller, that are mobile, who are able to go into community. And so for those who are interested, please contact our district office. And a lot of churches did fill out the state surveys, but it took a long time to do one churches at a time. They were looking for organizations that had multi-facet organizations that we could reach larger audiences and diverse audiences. And so the application in which I filled out got a lot of hits from pharmaceutical companies, smaller, that can come into our communities, into our neighborhoods to offer this. And so the state of North Carolina has stated that the United Methodist Church in North Carolina is the number one giver, if you will, of hosting vaccination sites. So we're just glad, because that's what we do as Methodists. We mobilize. I said there's a lot of things that we don't like about some of the things that are happening in Methodism, but one thing that we do and do with excellence is connectional, that we're able to organize very quickly.
Yeah, it makes me think too about like the Methodist history class in seminary, that like John Wesley, he was holistic, right? He wasn't just concerned with the soul, but he was concerned with the body too. He wrote his pamphlets about health, and he was told people how to wash their hands and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So just,
the primitive physics
into our heritage too.
Yeah, that was that was his help. Don't follow all the advice in that, by the way.
Yeah, he was a better preacher than he was a doctor.
Modern medicine has come a little further than Wesley, but yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Luke. And even to take it back further, if you think about Jesus' ministry of going town to town, village to village, preaching, teaching,
right.
Eating with people, listening to people, and healing the sick. Part of kingdom work is providing offering the avenues for physical healing. And so it is gospel work to help folks be vaccinated and stay healthy and well, care for the bodies that God has given them. And it's been really an amazing thing to see our churches do that, because you can go thank God for Walgreens and CVS and other places that have vaccinated us. But it's been humbling to watch these churches not only just open their doors and provide space, but for our clergy and laity to welcome their neighbors, to sit with them, to listen, to pray, to talk, to hold hands when folks were nervous about a vaccine and what this might mean for their health, to hear their stories, and hopefully by the work of the Spirit to have made some connections that will bear fruit down the line. That these folks may come, at least in this instance, the story in the community is that Methodist church down the street loved me, cared about me, welcomed me. And gosh, don't we need more and more of that?
Stephanie, you mentioned at the beginning that some stories have emerged. Would you be willing to share one or two of those stories?
Oh, yes. I'll share 1.5. At one of our sites, we had a lady come in, and as she was standing in line, she was about to, she had to grab onto someone because she was about to pass out. And so we had some folk go up to her that were nurses that were on site from the church, and they began talking to her, and she was nervous about taking the vaccine. That she didn't have any health issue, but she was so nervous about taking the vaccine. And so she just shared, she goes, I don't know what to do. She was an elderly lady. She said, I don't really know what to do, but I think it's the right thing to do, but I'm really nervous of what the outcome will be. And two of our women pulled her in the corner, and these were lay people, let me just say that, and they prayed for her. And they talked about their story, and they couldn't tell, you can't tell them what to do, but you can tell your own personal story. And they actually walked beside her all the way through the process, even when she sat in the chair to take the shot. And she sent a note back to say this. She said, I'm so glad that I get teared up. I'm so glad that the church was present in my neighborhood, because I don't know if I could have done it by myself. That's the witness of the church. That's the witness of the church. And so that's what I would say. I would just offer that one up as that. And then we just had bilingual speaking persons who were on the front lines talking to our Spanish speaking and even some of our African dialect present. People were nervous. People were uncertain. But the church is the hope of the world. It's not the bricks and mortar, but it is the people to people contact. And that's what it takes to draw people out.
So was part of being a host site advertising, getting people to show up?
Yes, the biggest part about being a host site is getting registration. And now the state has eased that you have to register prior to coming for vaccination. We are now taking walk-ins. But it's just canvassing the community, the relationships, your networks, talking. Today, I was with Myers Park on the phone, and we're potentially having a partnership with Salvation Army Crisis Assistance Ministry, Loaves and Fishes, on Spratt Street with the government. So it's those types of things. And we have to be mindful that if we want our underserved communities, everybody doesn't have technology to register in advance. So we have people on site registering people. The hardest part is just getting people out now after the Johnson & Johnson crises that we had with them having to pause. And I understand as of today, they're now reissuing Johnson & Johnson, but it's just physically getting the information to people that in a trusted manner, a narrative manner, and then showing up. So the marketing is the hardest part. The vaccination partners, they do everything else, but we have to register, get the marketing out. I will say WSOC has just been a great partner with me and with us, and they're putting it every afternoon at 5:30 on WSOC TV. And so it's partnerships with radios, stations, and television stations that are trying to get the message out beyond kind of our overserved communities or served communities, but trying to get it out to the masses in Mecklenburg County.
Yeah, something it just keeps coming up in conversations I've been having this past few weeks, but just the value of community partnerships in any kind of ministry, whether it's leading a fresh expression or a church plant or an existing church, that church vitality, church life, it grows and it blossoms from community partnerships. That once we start being isolated from the community, we're going down a tough path. But the more community partnerships we have, the more just life gets.
I will say we have dust off our evangelistic processes to boots on the ground in our communities, walking and talking to the community. That is what has definitely helped to get these numbers where they are.
And that's good practice for us church people too. I know we're nervous when we start talking about knocking on doors. So a good way to clear rooms, ask the room to do that.
Listen, I was nervous myself, but once the churches and the leaders began to say we can do this, they did it, and it's been fun. It's been some fun stories. Like, well, what do we say? Some people are like, well, what do we say? I'm like, I don't know what you say. Just go out there. God will provide.
Well, what are some other things that are happening in the Metro District that y'all would like to share about?
One of the things that that's been kind of a part of our life, mine and Stephanie's life over the past couple of years, as we've worked with churches in the district around their future, around maybe what challenges they currently are having. We all know that church is in kind of a moment of great change. We were already in that moment before the COVID pandemic. The pandemic merely, I think it just accelerated and highlighted a lot of that change. One of the ways that I know a lot of churches have begun at least shifting their thinking some is related to their physical location. Like, what does it mean to have a church? If the church is the body of Christ, the people worshiping, serving, engaged with their community. And then we have this kind of physical location from which we do some of that work, kind of a mission post. We have a lot of facilities, a lot of real estate in a number of our congregations that may or may not be suited for the ways that we need to be church today. Right? It was built for a prior era of being church. And so I have a number of conversations ongoing with churches who have these large campuses and buildings that aren't necessarily the tool they need for being able to engage their community effectively and faithfully today, because they were really designed more for bringing people into a space and gathering them there for whatever offerings the church had to gather people around. A couple of things have happened recently as church properties have a couple of churches that have closed or churches that have asked for remissioning. We have at the former Cole Memorial site, which is a church that closed before I became the superintendent in the Metro District. It's a site that's not probably 2-3 miles from UNC Charlotte, kind of that in that area. Eventually, we'll be on one of the light rail lines, maybe long after all of us have retired, but eventually, in kind of a growing part of the city, a changing part of the city. We've worked with Wesley Community Development to imagine, rather than sell that space, that the dirt underneath the building, to somebody else to build retail or whatever, was there a creative way that the church could engage the community and use that physical property both as maybe a way to generate revenue, but also a way to serve the neighborhood? And so we've partnered with Wesley Community Development to do that in kind of a multifaceted development that will include about 70 units of affordable housing for older adults, and then also some retail office space that will lease to other agencies, to businesses in the community, and be able to do sort of two things. One, serve older adults who desperately need affordable housing, which is a crisis in the Charlotte metro area. And at the same time, the conference, the district, will maintain ownership of the dirt underneath those buildings for the long-term vision of the church. If ever someday there needs to be a church on that site, a church home on that site, then the property's still there for us to do that. So that's one rather than just part ways with property, really to begin thinking creatively and strategically about, all right, this real estate that we have is a real gift. So how do we use it well? How do we steward it well? You can only sell it one time. So is there a way to hang on to some of the land that God has gifted us with and use it in new ways to serve the community? So that's just one example. Of course, folks are probably pretty familiar with the South Park Church example, where Reverend Kyle Thompson and their team really did a kind of large visionary leap of faith in redeveloping their site in the South Park area of Charlotte that is now retail, hotel, office space, and a new church, a brand new church right in the middle of that high-end development to serve that community, to kind of become a crossroads for that community where those who live and work there literally can come and gather and learn, explore faith, serve, be the church together. So we have another possibility like that that's kind of on the map. Two churches coming together. We hope one site will become some townhomes in the Charlotte area, and we'll be able to use that revenue on the other site to plant a new church where an existing church has been, to really create something brand new. So you use the property to provide the seeds, the gift that you need to do the ministry. Because I think we all know the ways that we have to be more creative about the ways, one, we use property, and the ways we seek funding for ministry. And so those are just a couple of examples of some creative ways churches have been thinking about that. And I think we'll see more of that, hopefully, over the next 10, 20 years as churches kind of lean into the future.
Absolutely. I travel in some church development circles, and property redevelopment is a part of those conversations. And one thing I've heard is that developers and real estate developers can help, or they can take advantage of churches. What would you say would be the important steps to take to make sure that a church is kind of going about this the right way? What resources or what tips would you have?
Yeah, that is a helpful observation, Luke, because obviously, there are folks who are in this business for the business of developing property, and their primary goal is running their business and making a profit. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with a business wanting to employ people and make a profit, but that is not the primary vision of the church. And so I think to be good stewards of property, one of the things I would encourage pastors and laity to do before they get too far into conversations with an eager developer who comes with a really wonderful creative idea, is that they sit down with their district superintendent, the district board of church location and building. For instance, our district board of church location and building in the Charlotte area metro district is comprised of people who have developed college campuses, who've built hospitals, who are architects, who've managed real estate firms. These are wise, intelligent, very experienced professionals who can help churches take a step back and say, okay, is this a legitimate developer that has the best interest of the church in mind? Or is this somebody just sees an opportunity and wants to make a big profit? And so I think that's where you begin with your district superintendent, your district board of church location and building. Sit down with them and say, here's the name of the developer. Do you all know them? What's their reputation? Here's the proposal they're making. Is there a better way to do this? You eventually would need the district board's approval anyway. So the earlier you engage them in that conversation, I think the better. It just puts more eyes and ears on the project before you get too far down the road and you sign something you shouldn't sign and you say, we wish we had gone a different direction.
And I would just add, Luke, to what David has just stated, is that in our district also, this is the multicultural, multiethnic cohort. We are working on church economics and entrepreneurship, how to maximize your assets. And so I'm encouraging, and we did this last year and we shifted a bit to actually say, what do we do to dream bigger with the assets in which God has given us? And so even prior to the developer is offering up a plan of action, is dreaming to discover what the community needs, number one, so that we can truly go deeper in our discipleship. And then number two, what would that look like? And how do you go about doing it with doing mapping of community, mapping of businesses, mapping and discovering through just a deep-seated discernment process, what are the possibilities that are out there, and then taking it from a discernment of all the possibilities and then asking yourselves the question, what is God calling this church to be and do in this season? And then developing that plan so that, as David mentioned, Charlotte is Mecklenburg County Metro District is the fastest growing district, number one in Western North Carolina, but number two, from a development standpoint, it's a hot space to develop anything. But we got to remember that we're the church. And so what is God calling us to do to make disciples for the transformation of the world?
Yeah, I was just going to add too, for our listeners, that Seeds of Change is a really cool program that Wesley CDC offers. That might be a good first step for some churches to kind of create that imagination of possibilities, because that's part of that program is they just throw a whole bunch of ideas out and see which ones kind of stick with your team. So definitely look up Wesley CDC as a follow-up to this topic too. Stephanie, you just mentioned the multicultural, multi-ethnic cohort that you all are doing. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes, it was probably 8 years ago when I became in this district and even on the conference staff. And I was looking at the demographics of how are we making disciples for the transformation of the world. And what I discovered, and we all know this, is that our churches are, particularly Methodism, is 97% Anglo. And then when I examined Western North Carolina, that number still holds steady. And the question becomes, we have to ask ourselves the question, if we're making disciples in Judea, Samaria, and all the ends of the earth, Jerusalem, how then do we cast our net on the other side? And so we had a tremendous opportunity in the Metro District because population-wise in the Metro District, we're 47% ethnic other. And so there is a tremendous harvest that we have. So therefore, working with some consultants who are doing this tremendous work, as well as myself, developed the multicultural, multi-ethnic cohort to actually take a deeper dive of what does that mean to be a Revelation 7:9 church, realizing that one day all tongues, tribes, and nations will be worshiping together. And it's a hard look because it's difficult to actually transform a homogeneous white church or even a homogeneous African-American church or whatever it is to be inviting and hospitable to the ethnic other. And because we're not familiar and we don't do that well, except for Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and around this area used to be one of the most diverse school systems in the nation. But it is now one of the most segregated school systems in the nation because of a lot of things that have happened. And so there's a tremendous need, because if we have 97% of the market when it comes to, I think Methodism is the third largest denomination in the nation, and actually in the globe, if I remember that correctly, is that we have a tremendous opportunity from a market standpoint of 47% ethnic other that we have not really capitalized on. And we know the history, to be quite honest, the central jurisdiction, the mergers, the split, and those types of things. And so that means our brown and black brothers and sisters are not necessarily in the United Methodist Church. So we know 60% of the population is not even in church. And so how are we a relevant witness? And I believe this, I get some pressure from both sides of this, is that we can do that. And we don't have a large percentage of multicultural churches. I think Good Shepherd is the largest. Talbert Davis is the largest multicultural, multiethnic church in Western North Carolina, and they do a really good job. There are others that can do that, and we really need to press in on what does that look like and how to do it.
Yeah, I saw that article about Talbot's church and the RNS. That was really cool. And can you tell us more about what the cohort looks like? Who's been a part of it? What topics are covered? How that meets? All that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right now we have 5 churches that are in the cohort. And the topics on this cycle is the scriptural foundations of why multicultural, multiethnic is biblical. There is biblical evidence of that, number one. Number two, to do a demographic report, because you don't want to do things just because it's the shiny new toy. You have to do it because that is the mission field in which God has called you. So examining your mission field. Has the demographics around the church changed? In a lot of spaces and places it has. A lot of people are driving into a central church, but all around them is very diverse. So canvassing community, being engaged with community, and seeing what the needs are and talking to people. And once you discover that, then it then says, then who can the church become? And that's the hard work of this, is doing that deep dive, map dive of community and understanding the needs, and then examining the inside of the church and saying, what is God calling us and where's the sweet spot? And then once we have that, developing a plan, an intentional plan of engaging with the other, engaging with our brothers and sisters who are not in the life of our church presently. And sometimes that means starting a new, fresh expression of faith outside of the walls of our church. And then sometimes that means to create space and place for people to come to as well. And so that's the discernment process. It's not one size fits all. It is based on what the discernment through the power of the Holy Spirit and the great needs of the communities. And once you pull all that together, then you start talking about what can we do? What can we do? What can we add to enhance and strengthen our communities that surround our churches?
I wonder what a few examples of, how a church has either been able to do that or how they've gotten started. So I'm sure there are some churches that are just getting started. Would love to hear about that a little bit. But then also maybe, I don't know if it's Talbot or another example, Talbot's church, but how they've made headway in that effort.
So I would say, for example, one church, I won't name because they haven't started yet, but they've gotten to a point where they're going to be able to lease some of their spaces out during the week to a variety of spaces. There may be a weekday school that gets launched. There may be another worshiping community that's worshiping during the week. And so they have a space that actually aligns with the values of who we are as Methodists. So that's one example. They didn't necessarily have that in the makings in the beginning when we started last year, but that birthed up that there's a tremendous opportunity for that. Now for persons, and if you were to talk to Talbot, and Talbot was one of my keynote speakers about a year and a half ago, because he is doing it and doing it well. And when you talk to him, he canvassed communities, but then I said, but Talbot, it's got to be more, it's got to be more, it's got to be more than that. And he did bring some consultants in to kind of talk, because you don't know what you don't know. And this is an adaptive challenge, if we're really honest with this. And so that means everything that we used to do, or a lot of things that we used to do, is not going to work in this new phase. And so you got to be willing to open yourselves up to determine what the steps are, create a plan through a deep-seated prayer, and using consultants that have done it. Joe Daniels is one of my consultants, along with a lot of other people that I bring in. And then my background and my experience, my doctoral work is on this work as well. And so putting all of those pieces of the puzzle together to then, and it's specific. Churches are specific. Some of them are Latino Hispanics that are around them, along with Anglo. Some of our churches have 5 to 6 different other ethnic groups in their congregations. But how do we become the church with, it doesn't matter what race you are, it doesn't matter what ethnic group you are, it doesn't matter your social economics, but how do we live as brothers and sisters for the kingdom of God? And that's the hard work. And again, Luke, it becomes specific church by church, what the makeup of the church are, what the ingredients of the church are, what the needs of the church are, and what the church has to offer.
Yeah. I think too, Stephanie, it entails, and Luke, it entails a willingness to listen, and to listen well to the community, to your neighbors, to just not to go to them with an agenda or to get warm bodies in a seat inside our building, but to listen well, to be willing to come alongside, hear their stories. If you just imagine the ministry of Jesus, he did a whole lot of that, just getting to know someone's story. And that is a real gift in a world that is increasingly divided, isolated, where individuals are, we really worship the individual. I think listening is critical. The other is, and I'd say this is true for any church that wants to that is seriously thinking about, how do we welcome new people into our midst? How do we make space for new people? And that is, we have to do the heart work around cultivating a willingness of letting go of my seat, and to say that, yeah, it's my favorite pew, but I'll give it up for someone else. And I mean that literally and metaphorically. To say that Jesus loved our neighbor so much that I'm willing to let go of whatever control and power and position I have in this community of church, and let someone else share it. And until we're really willing to do that, we're not ready to welcome people, because welcoming people will change us. It'll make us different. I think, by the grace of God, it makes us better. We're not giving up something, we're actually gaining. But right, that's kind of biblical too. If you let go of your life, you find a life far more abundant than the one you're clinging to at the moment. So I think the heart work is equally important, if not more so, than the technical steps and the processes that are necessary to reach out well, to engage our communities well.
And to add to number 3, to what David just said, and he's right, it's not about the practical piece of it, is that each church that decides that they want to begin the exploration of this, there's a 30-day season of prayer and discernment and walk in community. So if you're not willing to do that, then you're not ready to do it, because this is not about us, and it's not about our canned ministries, because the cohort is not a canned ministry. It's deep-seated discernment. And so a 30-day intentional praying and fasting, seeking God's wisdom on how do we do this, or is this our calling, or what our calling is.
Well, just briefly, I remember one of our calls with a group of churches. Bishop Peter Story Dr. Peter Story was leading our time together. And he said, friends, it's not about do we have enough courage to do this, it's do we have enough love?
Amen.
And I thought that was, that really reshapes the conversation.
For someone that is in another district in the conference, what would be a good kind of first step for them in this area? Maybe reaching out to JNR, or?
I think they should call Stephanie. She doesn't have enough to do. Right, Stephanie?
Not at all. I just
and cohorts and vitality work and a family and children, and you're just sitting around waiting for something to do. And then of course, Stephanie, the best thing for you to do then is to direct them to churches who've done it, so it's off your plate, and they can talk to some pastors and laity who've been in the trenches doing it. That's the best place to learn.
Absolutely. And the other thing to just add to that is that we've had a cohort for at least we've had a cohort, and they actually were connected to other districts. This one was not, because it was specifically in some areas in which we were trying to hone in on for the Metro District. But there are collaborative, and I really believe this should be a conference initiative, to be quite honest with you, that goes into every district that hits the 7785 corridor, because this is the work we're called to do in this season. And so I think it can be a conference-wide initiative, and I think it must be a conference-wide initiative to actually press our way into this process.
Yeah, I was also thinking about Bill White too. He's a new resource that we have in our conference, so excited about that.
Absolutely.
Dr. White's excellent. So reach out to Bill.
And I think it should go into the congregational development office as well, not just the ethnic other office. I think it's a collaboration of all of those offices, but the congregational development office, definitely Rob, and as Dan is transitioning out, but I think it has to go into those two departments as well.
Yeah, I think, and someone pointed out, you may have pointed this out to me, Stephanie, I don't know who said it, but it was a great observation, particularly in our district where 40+% of the population around us is non-white. If we can not do this work, that'd be fine, but we're basically saying we're okay with only reaching out to about 60% of the people around us. So, and we're good with not connecting with 4 out of 10. So that's basically what we're saying. If we're not willing to,
I think it must be a priority. I think it needs to be a priority, because then it touches on, and we didn't touch on this, but then it touches on the equity and justice in pandemics that we have when it comes to dismantling racism and systemic systems and being fully a just and equitable church. I do believe, probably more than now than any other time in my little 50 years of life, that when the church gets this thing right of being an open arms, open hearts, open doors church, loving everybody, then the world will be transformed, and we won't have to have these continuous conversations about equity and justice for everyone.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for your work in this area. David, thank you for your leadership in the Metro District. Looking forward to seeing your work at Davidson. And I'm not just saying that because you're technically my DS right now, but
not for long, Luke.
All right, that sounds good. Well, I appreciate both of y'all and taking the time to from your busy schedules to be on this episode of Means of Grace. And I know that it'll be a gift to those that have listened. So thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. Once again, that's at WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.